to identify them on the models. So let's talk about the dermis. The dermis is divided into two basic layers. We have, and it's very easy to see on this particular model, we have the layer from the bottom of the vessels up to, see how the epidermis kind of has a curvy bottom? But anyway, we have the curvy bottom here, and that's going to be the top of that top layer. So from here to the bottom of the vessels, you have the papillary layer. The term papillary layer is coming from the papillae, and here's the papillae. They're little finger-like projections that stick out of the dermis. So there you go. There's your papillae. So the top of the papillae make up the top of the papillary layer, and the bottom of these vessels here make the bottom of the papillary layer. There is actually a different kind of connective tissue up here in this layer than there is down here, so that's why they have different names. And they'll also be able to find different structures in each of these layers. Moving on down in the dermis, we have the other layer, and that is going to be the reticular layer. So this might confuse you, and you might want to think to yourself, oh, reticular, it's got reticular connective tissue. No, you're only going to find reticular connective tissue in the liver, and the spleen, and the lymph nodes. This is just called the reticular layer just because that's what somebody named it. Okay, it does have a different kind of connective tissue, generally a dense, irregular connective tissue. Just FYI. So there's your dermis and the two layers therein. Here, you can still see the difference. You can see the top of the papillae here, and you can see the bottom of the vessels. So from the bottom of the vessels to the papillae here, that's your papillary layer, and from the bottom of the vessels, basically on down before the fat. So this represents fat. Before then is going to be your reticular layer. Okay. So moving on to the structures within the dermis. The dermis has all of your support structures for your skin. So that includes the hair follicle and the hair shaft growing out of it, sweat glands, oil glands, and sensory stuff. Okay. So usually how I go through this is I say, okay, let's go through glands, then let's go through sensory. So we're going to do that. Okay. So first things first, let's go through the glands. There are 3 different kind of glands you got to know about. Okay. So first off, you'll notice that there's these twisty-turny guys, and you'll see that even over here, but we'll talk about this model in a second. On this particular model, you can clearly see that there's 2 of these twisty-turny looking guys. These are both sweat glands, but they're different from each other. So first off, we have this little guy, okay? And you can see that he's physically smaller than this guy. That's legitimate. That represents real life. So for these little guys here, you can find them all over the skin. They're just putting out regular old sweat. So salt, water, whatever the body doesn't want anymore, puts it out on the skin, okay? So there we go. And these, depends on, I guess, what list you've used in the past, but they can be eccrine, E-C-C-R-I-N-E, or merocrine, as per your list. But again, everywhere in the body, just releasing salt and water. Here's these guys here. Oh, and one thing I want to note about these is that they are usually not associated with the hair. So they're just free agents going up to the top. These guys here, you can see that they're much larger physically, and they're only going to be found in certain places in the body. So particularly under the arm, around the nipple, sometimes behind the ear as well, and around the groin.
Your head, right?
Nope. So these ones release smelly sweat. Okay, so this is where you get like pheromones and all that kind of stuff. The other thing that these cells can actually, these glands can actually do is produce milk. So for females in the nipple area, these can actually produce milk. So really interesting, super awesome glands. But again, so they're releasing normal sweat, but also other smelly stuff. So either pheromones or other stuff like milk or whatever. And you can actually see on this particular model, here's our small guys, the eccrine or the merocrine, and here's our big guys. And you can actually see that they're lined with all of these cells. And these cells are what's going to explode and produce those pheromones or oily kind of secretions or the milk. In the case of a female nipple area, these guys. So these are called apocrine, A-P-O-C-R-I-N-E, apocrine glands. And again, still sweat glands, but a little bit different. And you'll notice on this particular model especially that they are generally associated with the hair. What kind of hair are they generally associated with? Well, think about those areas. Like under the arm, it's like that coarse, like curly hair. Same with around the groin and on the nipple. So usually if you see those weird coarse curly hairs compared to like your head hair, you're going to be finding these apocrine glands. The last gland that I can point out to you guys is the sebaceous gland. So the sebaceous gland produces oil. And you're going to find, like, that's, you know, why you got to wash your hair all the time, right? It's going to be producing these oils. So they're always, in that case, if you think about it that way, they will always, 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 always be associated with the hair. So you can see that here's the hair, and there's like this globular thing attached to it. So here's a three-dimensional, and here it is cut in half. So here's your sebaceous gland. And again, producing oil onto the hair to keep it nice and healthy. And here you see the same thing, but it looks a little different. So here's your hair, here's a half view of that sebaceous gland, and here's a three-dimensional view of that sebaceous gland. Moving on to the sensory stuff. So sensory stuff, for the integument, rather than having like a free nerve, well, there are free nerve endings, but rather than certain other things that you would normally see in the case of sensory, what you're actually going to see are these corpuscles. So they're these lamellated or they're laminar, and they have several layers surrounding a sensory end. So you're either going to have these guys or these guys. So let's talk about these guys first. These are called your Pacinian corpuscles. So corpuscle, again, just because it's this laminar detector down here. Pacinian is always going to be deep, and it's large, and what it's detecting is pressure. So I always think Pacinian deep pressure, PPP, because that's just, I don't know, that's what helps me. But they feel if you grab somebody pretty hard and you feel that pressure, that's what Pacinians are detecting. And you can see those here as well. There you go, Pacinian corpuscle. The other sensory guy here is going to be your Meissner corpuscles. And you can see that these are closer to the surface. So just as you would expect, these are delivering tactile information. So, you know, if you want to think about like Pacinian, you grab somebody, Meissner, you're like stroking them, you know, whatever. You don't got to be creepy about it like me, but that's just how that goes. So here's our Meissners here, and you can see that they live in the papillae. And here's our Meissners here, and again, they live in the papillae. And just something interesting to think about that this model actually shows. So if this is thick skin, we're probably looking at the hand, and you'll notice that there are more Meissner's corpuscles in this tissue. That's because we have a lot of tactile information in our hands, so more Meissner's corpuscles, more tactile information. There you go. You're going to have more sensitivity in your fingertips. Moving on, we have some stuff with the hair and associated hair structures. Basically, the only three things that you need to know are the shaft of the hair follicle. So the hair follicle is actually like a layer of connective tissue that surrounds the bulb of the hair. That's why if you pull out, you know, your hair, you're not like pulling out all this other stuff that's around it. You have like a nice follicle that protects the rest of the tissue around your hair. So once you pull out that hair, you know, it's fine. It's only coming out of the follicle. So hair shaft, follicle, and then this guy here. So this is a little strip of muscle referred to as the erector pili. And a lot of people think like I'm erecting a pillar, so standing it up, because that's what these guys do. They contract and then the hair stands on end. So that's why, like when a cat looks really pissed off, or if you're cold, those hairs stand up straight on end. So you can use that to think about the name, but don't use that to think about the spelling. Erecting a pillar is spelled E-R-E-C-T, but erector pili is A-R-R-E-C-T-O-R. Okay, so keep that in mind. Just be careful about your spelling. So let's see here. I believe I've covered all those structures, and again, the last thing you really need to know about is just hypodermis, and as long as you know it's this fatty layer on the bottom, you're good to go. And that's it for the integument.